Morning, everybody. Good morning, Patrizia. So first of all, allow me to thank INVALSI and to thank you personally for inviting me again, also this year, and for having me as part of this very nice event, which I've seen growing through the years. Second, well, some logistical issues concerning the organization of the session, which was supposed to have two speakers, Andrea Sandoval Hernandez and Enrico Giovannini, who has been carried away, or better, transported to different to different responsibilities, as he has now just become the Minister of Transport, which implies that he will not be with us. Therefore, this session will have not two speakers as initially planned, but only one, which means basically that we will have more time to look in detail at the presentation, at the contents that Andres will give us. I'm very glad to introduce Andres Sandoval Hernandez because, well, we go a long way. I mean, now Andres is researcher at the University of Bath, but we met when he was in his previous assignment as head of research and analysis at the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, the IEA, which does many of the large-scale assessments that we're interested in. And in addition to that, through the years, he has also covered a number of different academic positions, mostly in Mexico, at the Universidad Iberoamericana and at the Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales. Through the years, Andres has been advising and collaborating with the ministers of education of various countries, plus many international organizations, including the World Bank, the OECD, UNESCO, and UNICEF. His research interests include comparative analysis of educational systems through large-scale assessments with a direct focus on educational inequalities and civic education. And this interest is, in fact, the engine behind the presentation of today, which will give us an overview of his last efforts to devise an applied framework to measure indicators on education for sustainable development and global citizenship by using large-scale assessment data. But without further ado, Andres, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Daniele, and thank you very much also to INVALSI, to Patrizia, to Roberto for the invitation. I am very happy to be here today. I'm very happy to participate in this conference for another year, and I also hope that we can meet in person, not too far away in the future. So today, as Daniele was saying, I want to talk to you, I will talk to you about an effort, a research project that we have been coordinating with UNESCO, and more specifically with the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. And this is about applying a framework to measure some indicators included in the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those that are related to education for sustainable development and education for global citizenship, with the use or based on data from international large-scale assessments. So, sorry. Okay. So as you may know, we have 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These sustainable development goals are designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. And they're in different areas. But the ones that we are interested in this case is the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is about quality education, providing quality education for all. And more specifically, two of the targets in this SDG, which is the SDG 474 and 475. 474 is about global citizenship and sustainability, and 475 is about environmental science and geoscience. And what we are going to be talking about these two. What is important to say is that when these SDGs were set back in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly, they were intended to be, they said that they wanted to achieve them by 2030. But at the time, when they were set and everybody agreed that, yeah, we are going to meet these goals, there was very little discussion about how we are going to measure them. So everybody agreed we are going to meet them, but we didn't know how do we know if we meet them or not. And as we are now in the last, what the United Nations have called the decade of action, deciding on a measurement strategy has become a pressing issue, because we need to know whether we are going to achieve these goals or not. As you can tell, if you look at the definition or the description of the goals, it is very blurry. Percentage of lower secondary students showing adequate understanding of issues relating to global citizenship and sustainability. The first question is, what do we mean by global citizenship and sustainability? And what do we mean by adequate? The other target is very similar, no? Showing proficiency in knowledge. What do we mean by proficiency? What do we mean by environmental science and geoscience? And those were really the challenges. Since these goals were set, there have been lots of works. I mean, lots of research teams around the world in different countries trying to provide a framework to define these concepts, trying to provide a framework to measure these concepts. Many options or many initiatives were set, were discussed, but now that we are coming close to the deadline, I was asked to, together with a team of colleagues, to explore whether we could use the data that we already have. So we know that we have these international large-scale assessments. We know that more than 100 countries around the world participate in different large-scale assessments. So the data is there, but the problem or the question was, to what extent can we use this data to measure these goals? With this in mind, back in 2016, we were contacted by people from the Global Monitoring Report, and they commissioned to us a report to explore to what extent ICCS, I will tell you a bit more in detail later on, but this is the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, to what extent this study could provide data to measure the target 4.7, the SDG about education. And this, as I said, this what I'm going to present today is the result of a series of projects that started in 2016 and will finish this year. And there are basically four main documents that have been providing information for this. The first one was this exploration, which is a working paper, a background paper for the Global Monitoring Report. But also we have some other reports. After doing this initial exploration, they said, okay, it seems, the conclusion was that it seems that we have enough information to do this. So based on that, we were then contacted by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, and they asked us to okay, if there is in principle enough information, please prepare a proposal to measure these two goals. And actually at the beginning, there were 3 different goals. So we did. This is a work that I have been doing not on my own, but with a team, mainly with Maria Magdalena Isaac from KU Leuven, and Diego Carrasco and Daniel Miranda from the Universidad Católica de Chile. So we prepared this first proposal, which included a global framework, included a statistical proposal on how to produce the scores and thresholds. And then they took this initiative together with some others to the TAG meeting, which is the Technical Advisory Group that is in charge of measuring these goals. They has representations from most of the countries that belong to the UN and some other international organizations. So they voted different options, different alternatives, and they chose our proposal for two of the goals, which is what I'm going to talk to you today about, 474 and 475. So they said, okay, we are happy with this proposal. So the next step was the third report, which is, okay, we are okay with the proposal. Now we want you to apply it. We want you to actually produce the scores that are describing in the proposal. We did, and these scores are now included in the official dashboard, the SDG dashboard, the UNESCO's webpage, where they have a compilation of all the data, how countries are doing in all the 17 SDGs, so the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This information is already available there. And the last thing that we are preparing at this moment, as we speak, is a set of technical guidelines for the application of this strategy for the countries who have not participated in these international large-scale assessments. So because most of the information that we produce comes from the background questionnaires of these assessments, is not that. It includes the test, but most of it, or much of it, includes the background questionnaires. The background questionnaires, the instruments are freely available, are public. So countries who have not participated in these studies, they can take these instruments, draw a sample, apply the instruments to the samples, and produce a data set, produce the scores, and produce information to measure and monitor how they are doing in relation to these sustainable development goals. So this is the whole thing that we are working on. So the presentation today is divided in 4 parts. And that has to do with the documents that I was describing before, and what is the map, what is the path that we follow to arrive to this end, to produce these measures, to monitor these SDGs. So the first thing has to do with the global content framework, which has to do with defining what do we mean by educational global citizenship education and education for environmental sustainability. So what do we mean by that? Second part is mapping existing tools from ILSAS, or International Large-Scale Assessments, into the SDGs. So once we have a definition, we have to see what are the ILSAS measuring, what are these international studies measuring, and whether, to what extent we have an overlap of these two things. So to what extent can we use this information that we already have to measure these goals? The third thing would be the definition of scores and proficiency levels. And this is the more technical part. So now that we know what kind of model we're going to use, what kind of scores are we going to produce, and then a very important part, how much is much? This is the part, if you remember, I was telling you, the definition says adequate knowledge. What does adequate mean? And this is it. This is the threshold. How much is much? How do we know how much is adequate? Once we have a score, we have numbers. How do we know what represents adequate or what represents enough? And that was the third part of the process. And finally, produce the indicator, which is the proportion or the percentage of the students that meet SDG indicators 474 and 475. So after all this, this is the UNESCO really wanted to know is, give me a percentage for each country of what is the proportion of students who are meeting these goals. So we can monitor in time and we can see if we are progressing or not towards achieving these SDGs. So the first part, the global content framework. What is global citizenship and what is sustainable development? That was the first question. And this, when we started to look into this, we realized that there were, I don't know, really like 30 different research projects, 30 different reports, probably more, commissioned by UNESCO to define these two concepts, global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. And probably 30 is expressly commissioned by the UNESCO, but there were close to 200 different frameworks defining these things. We have many theories from all over the world, from many research groups, many different theories, different assumptions. It was really a lot of information. So what we did in this case was to see which of all these frameworks was the one that had more approval. What is the one that UNESCO was using in its official documents for other initiatives related to these topics? And we concluded that that was a framework developed by IBE. This is a very interesting report because what they did was to go backwards. What they did, instead of providing a definition of these two concepts based on theory, they say, okay, we're going to review the curriculums, the curricula, or 78 countries they did. They took a sample of 78 countries, reviewed the curricula, and look for what are countries teaching their children about global citizenship education, and what are their countries teaching their children about education for sustainable development. And based on that, they produced a definition. This table in the slide is too small for you to read. It's not the intention that you read it. Anyway, the presentation is going to be available for you to look in detail into these things. And of course, the documents in which this presentation is based, they are going to be also available for you with links in this presentation. But what I want you to see is that this framework had covered the two concepts that we were interested in: global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. And the other thing that I want to tell you is, or I want you to notice, is that the framework is structured as categories and subcategories. So for education for global citizenship, we have a set of categories, conceptual categories. And for each of these categories, we have subcategories. And this is related with the topics, with the specific topics that these 78 countries are teaching their children related to these two topics or concepts. So once we agreed with UNESCO that this was the framework that we wanted to use, we moved to the next step. The next step was, okay, now we have an operational definition of these two concepts, but to what extent these concepts are covered by the international large-scale assessments frameworks. So the next thing that we did was to review different assessments. So we wanted to choose one or several assessments, but and the criteria to choose them was that well, as you know, every international assessment, they have a framework or a theoretical framework. They publish these documents. So they have what is the framework that they use to produce their instruments, to come up with the questions that they're going to ask students. So we check these documents against this global framework for the UNESCO's framework. And the idea was that, of course, the assessment of the international assessment had to refer to the concepts relevant to the SDGs. So we have these categories and subcategories. So these categories and subcategories should be related to the framework of the assessment. And moreover, we were checking then the instruments, the actual instruments. So the idea was to see whether we had questions that are covering each of the subcategories in the framework. And the third criteria was that they should allow long-term monitoring. That was very important because we want to know, we want to monitor. The intention is not only to measure, but to monitor, to see how we are doing, to evaluate trends. So with this criteria in mind, well, we have an additional thing. UNESCO made an emphasis that they understood these concepts not only as knowledge, not only with a cognitive component, but also with a non-cognitive component, which in principle had to do with socio-emotional aspects and behavioral aspects of global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. So with this in mind, we moved to analyze different assessments. For the first one, for the SDG 474, which is the global citizenship, we analyzed OECD PISA and IEA ICCS. So PISA and the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study. That was after the step after analyzing the frameworks of other even regional and national assessments. We moved to these two. And for the SDG 475, we analyze again PISA and TIMSS. And the idea here was we separated this framework into cognitive, socio-emotional, behavioral, and then we had the information for the two SDGs, and then we were checking what is the overlap, what is the coverage that we have of these contents. The result of this analysis was that for the SDG 474, the global citizenship education, we selected ICCS, and for TIMSS we selected PISA. I have to say, like in the case of for SDG 475, we selected TIMSS. I have to say that PISA has very good information, especially in the last edition. The global competence scale and the global competence questions are very good. The problem with that was that we don't know if this is going to be repeated next cycle. Probably not, because they are changing these special topics every cycle. And the problem with education for sustainability, also PISA was practically had the same coverage as TIMSS, but as you may know, also PISA has a focus. It focuses in one subject every 3 years. So if, well, the last time was science, the next time that they are going to evaluate science is going to be 9 years. So it's going to take a long time. So we at the end, for these reasons, we decided to stick to ICCS and TIMSS for this proposal. Now, this is an example of, again, it's not the intention that you are able to read what is there, but what I can tell you is that we have here the categories and subcategories. Here we have a column for cognitive items. Here we have a column for socio-emotional and behavioral. And what we were doing for each of the categories is selecting the items that would cover these aspects, these different aspects. And as you can see, for example, in this case, we didn't have any items measuring behavioral intentions or behaviors for these particular categories and subcategories. And in the case of the SDG 475, is something similar. No, we have the items here, and then we have for each of the non-cognitive dimensions, what are the items that could help us to measure that. So once we had that, and once we had an idea, a rough idea that we have enough items to cover most of the content framework of the SDGs, the next step was then to define scores and proficiency levels. In other words, how much is enough? So I was telling you, like the SDG 475 talks about proficiency in knowledge of environmental science, and the 474 talks about adequate understanding. So the question was then, even if we can measure that, how much we have a score, what point in this, what is the cutoff point for us to say this is adequate or knowledge, or so. To do that, we did it in 4 steps. The first step, of course, that we know that we have items measuring that, but we don't know how much, what is the proportion of missing values, which is an issue. In any assessments, it can be an important issue in international large-scale assessments, because many times there are some items that countries, for different reasons, decide that they are not going to provide information on those, or people just don't answer these items. So the first step was to check for availability. Do we have enough information to produce a scale? Second step was unidimensionality. So can we create a score for, let's say, attitudes towards gender differences? So we have items, but can we put them together empirically, statistically speaking? Can we put them together in one score? That was the second step. The third step was to decide on a measurement model. Once we know that we have these constructs, that these theoretical constructs can be built in statistically, what is the measurement model that we're going to use? And finally, how do we establish the proficiency levels, or how do we establish the cutoff points? What point in the scale is going to be marked as the threshold to say that the students are reaching the different goals and targets? So after checking for availability, and what we did was to use a response model, that in which I'm not going to bore you with the technical details, but I just want to tell you that was a partial credit model, because we decided for this model because it allows us to obtain item and person parameters for items with 2 categories or more, or for a set of items with a different number of categories. And we also use, this is the response model. Then with the expected responses, we created these item person maps. The part above, you can see the distribution of individuals, and the part below, you can see the distribution of the items, or the response possibilities for each of the items. Based on that, we created an empirical threshold, that is the point in which students are more likely to endorse. In this case, I'm taking the graphs that correspond to gender equality. So we had a construct that is gender equality, and we use an empirical threshold to say, up from this point and above, students are more likely to endorse gender equality than not endorsing it. And this is, of course, an empirical point that we sent back. That was at the time that we were doing this proposal. We send it back for each of the indicators. We send it back to UNESCO and ask them to comment whether they think this is an acceptable threshold or cutoff point. Because of course you can move it based on qualitative criteria. And the other thing that this method allows us is to say, what exactly do we mean by endorse gender equality? Because we have the items, and we can tell you at this point, students are more likely to endorse women's participation in policy, endorse redistributive policies, and I don't know, the different items that we have here. So we can tell you precisely what is the probability for each of the items that students are going to endorse if they are reaching this threshold. So once we did all this, the first step is to estimate or to calculate the proportion of students reaching each of the targets. So in other words, how are we doing? How are the different countries that we have information for doing towards the achieving these two targets or these two SDGs. To do that, it's important again to remember for 474, the target that we are measuring is the percentage of lower secondary students showing adequate understanding of issues related to citizenship and sustainability. We have one part that is cognitive, and the definition of this threshold, the qualitative definition, is that at this point, students or the students who meet the target can make connections between the processes of social and political organization and the legal and institutional mechanisms used to control them in relation to global citizenship and sustainability. So that would be the qualitative definition that comes from the specific items that are used to measure this threshold. And then for the non-cognitive part, we had a number of targets. The definition is that at this threshold, or when we say a student is meeting this target, means that the students have more than 50% chance of probability of endorsing the different components. So when we say that for the target of interconnectedness and global citizenship, for this target, we can say that when a student meets this target, he or she has 50%, more than 50% probabilities of endorsing global citizenship and interconnectedness. Same thing for gender equality. We had another one that has to do with peace and non-violence, health and well-being, sustainable development. We also have some indicators for global local thinking, multiculturalism. In the case of human rights, we have freedom of expression and social justice. And well, for each of those, if you go to the full reports, you will see that we have a specific definition for each of those. What do we mean by that? But the results, again, this is the results for all the countries that we have. In the top part, you can have the initials of the countries. In the Y-X, you have the different indicators. And each of the squares represents 100% of the students in a country. And each of the smaller squares or dots represent 10%, no, 1% of the students in each country. This is, again, too small for you to read, but I'll show you a close-up in a minute. So this is Italy here, so you can have a visual exploration of where is Italy standing. But if we look at a close-up of this SDG 474, in Italy, we have the knowledge, we have the threshold for knowledge, and we have that 55% of the Italian students are now have now reached this goal. And then we have a series of non-cognitive outcomes. We have global local, 45%, gender equality, 59%, non-violence, 49%, freedom of expressions, 47%, social justice, very high, one of the highest actually, 79%, sustainable development, this is the endorsement of sustainable development, is 55%. Multiculturalism is not very good, particularly in Italy. It's actually one of the in the bottom quartile, I would say, if you compare with the other countries, is 15%. And then we have a general indicator of SDG 474. And this general indicator is calculated as the proportion of students that reach more than half of the targets for this particular goal. So as you can see, it is this is the number that you're going to see published in UNESCO's documents. But as Roberto was saying in his opening words, I think it's very important to have accurate disaggregated data that can allow us to have to make decisions, to inform decisions that we make. Because this number, this average, hides, for example, the issue with multiculturalism that is quite low. So we want to know how, as a country, we want to progress towards meeting these goals. We have more disaggregated information here. In the case of Italy, is very, I mean, most of the indicators for this goal are around 50%, but we have two exceptions, no social justice that is very high and multiculturalism that is very low. But this information we have for all the other countries that we have information for. And again, the good thing about this proposal is that it's comparable. We can compare across countries. So if we see that in Italy, we have a low proportion of students endorsing multiculturalism, there are other countries with this where this proportion is higher. So something that we can do is to do a more qualitative analysis, probably analysis of policy documents, probably going to information particular to those countries and see what exactly they are doing. What are they doing in their schools? What kind of policies they have in relation to multiculturalism or integration of immigrants, for example. And we could have this exchange. Not, of course, misinformed or not well-informed policy borrowing, but a deeper understanding of what's going on in these other countries and what can we learn from them. And the opposite, no? Some countries are going to have, in fact, very low proportions in social justice, and probably Italy has something to tell them, something to help them with. If we move to the other SDG that we have information for, this is the 475, and this is the percentage of lower secondary students showing proficiency in knowledge of environmental science and geoscience. And again, when we say that in knowledge, the cognitive part, the student met the goal, we say that these students can apply and communicate their understanding of concepts from environmental science and geoscience in everyday and abstract solutions. So this is the qualitative definition. For this goal, we have the non-cognitive part has only two components. One is the socio-emotional part, which is about enjoying environmental science and geoscience, and the behavioral part that is about confidence in environmental science. So this is this has to do with actions with confidence, and this has to do with how much they enjoy this learning science. No? I'm sorry. And again, when we say that someone has reached the non-cognitive components, we say that these students who have reached this component have more than 50% chance of endorsing, of enjoying environmental science, or more than 50% chance of having confidence in when they learn or when they do things related with environmental science. In this case, we have also the same thing. We have the countries at the top, the initial of the countries, and then the three-letter code. And then we have in the y-x, we have the different targets that we measure. For Italy is here. And again, you can see, I don't know, for enjoyment, we have some countries that are much higher than Italy, but we also have, like, for example, this is Korea. Korea has a much lower than Italy in enjoyment. Japan has even lower in confidence, for example, than Italy. But we can see that just a visual examination that Italy is doing actually in this one quite well in comparison with the other countries that we have data for. At the bottom, we have the global indicator. If we look at the close-up, we can see that in Italy, the 25% of the students are reaching the goal in terms of knowledge, having adequate knowledge. And the socio-emotional part, this is the enjoyment, is 24%, and the behavioral part is 31%. And the global indicator for Italy, as it is published in the UNESCO data set, is 31%. So some final thoughts that I wanted to talk to you is, First, that we believe that studies like TIMSS, ICCS, and PISA are well suited for providing a proxy measurement of indicators 474 and 475. Of course, we have that this measurement strategy has all the limitations that international assessments have. It has all the limitations that large-scale assessments have, has all the limitations that quantitative research has in general, the cross-sectionality, the impossibility of making causal links between the information. But nevertheless, we think that is the best we have at the moment. I mean, if you think about it in an optimal scenario, probably what we should do is to go back to the framework for the SDGs and create an assessment that measures specifically those targets, and then apply this assessment in all countries around the world. But this is unfortunately very unpractical. This would be probably in an ideal world, but this cannot be done. So the good thing is that we have information for more than 100 countries around the world already there. And the good thing, what we believe, is that the information that we have a good enough overlap with the global content framework of the SDGs, so we can provide the proxy measurement of it, so we can have an idea of where we are. As I'm saying, we have information for many countries, but we don't have information for the majority of countries. In this case, we had valid information for 60 countries. Out of the 100 countries that participate in these two studies, there was valid information for 60 countries, for all the targets, for all the indicators that we calculated. And this is 60 out of 195 countries recognized by the United Nations. So we are far away from having total information. However, that was the reason why we were commissioned for creating technical guidelines for other countries to be able to collect this information. This is, of course, challenging, but this is why it's challenging, because many countries do not have an evaluation agency like INVALSI has. I always say that when we talk about educational evaluation agencies in the world, I always give the example of INVALSI. I think you have a very strong, very well established agency that has, of course, the capability of collecting this information. In fact, INVALSI already coordinates these studies and many others. But there are countries that they don't even have an evaluation agency. And of course, for them, it would be very difficult to follow all the steps that you need to follow. No? From the practical things like having the materials ready, the logistics to distribute them, but also the more technical things, the aspects that have to do with sampling. Sampling of an education system is not an easy task, as you well know, and also scaling processing the information, scaling the information, publishing the information. This all requires a coordinated effort and support by all stakeholders. If we, as a collective, want to have a measurement, an idea, we want to have information of how we are doing in these SDGs, in these goals, if we are serious about achieving them in 10 years from now, we will need a coordinated effort by all the stakeholders, by all different countries, all different agencies, to be able to collect this data. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm something is not working with my computer. But well, sorry.
It's not working.
Okay. So we have it's important that we have this effort, so we have the information that we need to address the global challenges that we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. So as I would like to close this presentation with something and a very similar idea to what we were discussing in the opening, that is, we need information. We need good quality information if we want to have informed, well developed, well designed policies to address the objectives that we have. And yeah, this would be all. Grazie per la vostra attenzione. And if you have any questions, I will be very happy to questions or comments to discuss with you.
So first of all, thank you, Andres, very much for your contribution. For anybody who has questions, please type them on the general chat or eventually raise your hand. But I will take an advantage as chair of this session, just basically to start with a couple of comments and a question myself. So as you just pointed out at the end of this presentation, indeed, and also at the beginning, I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint, basically, that allows us to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all, or at least this is the direction in which these goals are designed. These goals address the most important global challenges that we face, and they include indeed poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, prosperity, and peace and justice. Limited, of course, to the world of education, but INVALSI can be an actor in this process, because indeed INVALSI organizes the collection of important large-scale data, both with its national assessment, but in the perspective that you have given, also by collecting all the international large-scale assessments that are done in Italy, which include, of course, ICCS, TEAMS, PISA, and others. And I guess that one of the most important points is that these data are collected consistently since the 90s. It's not necessarily the case that all countries participate to all rounds of all these large-scale assessments and consistently have all this data available. Of course, as we see in this conference, in this event, the data is fruitfully used for research. But of course, the data has also tremendous potential for other possible uses, one of which is indeed to inform important policy goals, such as the SDGs that you have illustrated. Indeed, there is limitations due to concept coverage, which you have mentioned extensively, but there is very large opportunities. And Italy has the possibility, the opportunity to monitor these objectives over time. So, well, I guess two questions in this perspective. One has a comparative dimension, which is, of course, my key interest, and it would be to understand what are the other European countries? Is there a consistent number of other countries that is in the same position, that has the same opportunity as Italy to systematize, let's say, the monitoring of this type of objectives? And the second would be maybe more related to Italy. I mean, INVALSI could try to automatize the estimation of these indicators, which each wave of data collection. And so, what do you think the resources to best achieve this objective would be? I mean, do you have any suggestion in this direction?
Thank you, Daniele. In terms of how many countries do we have that who can, realistically speaking, implement this kind of strategy, I would say that probably as many as the ones that are already participating in these assessments. So we have the usual suspects, you know, in the countries that have been participating in this ICCS, TEAMS, PISA for several cycles now. I think those are the ones who are in a good position to implement this strategy. But this is paradoxical because at the same time are the ones who already have the information. So I think that all the countries that participate in these studies, they have the information. They don't have to do anything. The information is processed. Of course, they can do other things like doing specific analysis. Yeah, like disaggregations of the data for different regions, for different groups of society, for example. But they mostly have it. I think that and the countries in Europe, I think there are around 30 countries, if I'm more or less correct, who are, I would say, judging by the participation in these international assessments, who are in a good position to implement this. But I would look at those countries more as the ones who have to support the others. There are many countries in Europe, in Eastern Europe, for example, that they do not participate in the assessment, so they would need help. We don't know exactly, we haven't done a survey to see, because there are, of course, countries who do not participate in international assessments, but that they have a good, well-established evaluation agencies. Some of them participate in regional assessments rather than international assessments. Like the ones organized by UNESCO, no? These assessments in French-speaking Africa or Latin America or Southeast Asia. So there are also some countries there. But what I would say is what is important rather is to look at the others. We are producing these technical guidelines, but one of the first things that we realized when we were writing the document is that it was going to be very difficult for someone who has no knowledge, no experience. Knowledge, I mean, you can read and you can learn, but I think the experience of doing it, as people from INVALSI will very well know, is very important, because of course it's not the same in theory than in practice. All the difficulties, the challenges that you can face when you are actually doing an assessment, implementing an assessment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to know whether there is other questions or points that you maybe would like Andres to develop further.
Well, probably Daniele, only insist. I have presented this initiative from the time it was a proposal, when they were evaluating it, when different countries were evaluating it, and there's always some people are worried about to what extent this is good enough, to what extent this is accurate representation of how we are doing in terms of global citizenship or education for sustainability. And I would say that it's good enough. As I said at some point during the presentation, it's not perfect, of course, but I think I'm convinced that this is the best we have at the moment, because the option, the alternative to this is nothing. And I think that the cost that we potentially may pay of not measuring at all, not evaluating at all, is much higher. And it's something that we should consider. No? We have to be aware of the limitations, but at the same time, we have to use information in the best possible way. There are other things that we can do, as I was saying. No? The other analysis that we can implement, other analysis that we can do based on this initiative. But yeah, this would be the one of the bottom line messages that I would say. This is the best we have, and yeah, and we have to work with it. And I think I'm convinced that it is good enough to provide an overview of where we are, and an overview of what can we do, how can we inform policies in order to achieve the goals that we have set for 2030.
I like very much this comment, which reminds me of my time in INVALSI, because indeed the issue is always not measuring everything, but as well, Roberto will probably say plenty of times also in this event, it's measuring something, because indeed the price that we pay would be the price of not knowing. Gustavo Lanata asks a question concerning how much participation do we see from Latin American countries, and especially in the PISA study?
Well, Latin American countries, we have an issue with Latin American countries. We don't have many. However, we have some. We have I mean, if we look at the regions, we have the biggest countries in the region participate in the studies. Latin America, we have 19-20 countries participating in different studies, but for this initiative, we only have around 7 to 10. There's some other work. Most of Latin American countries do not participate in PISA or do not participate in teams in ICCS, but they do participate, 20 of them, in the regional assessment that organizes UNESCO. There is another initiative that has to do with the SDGs 471 and 472, that the ones that have to do with literacy and mathematics. They are trying different things to estimate an equivalence between those regional and also national assessments and international assessments, so to have a much broader coverage. I think that is promising. There's lots of information on the internet, on the UNESCO webpage, but this could be an answer or an alternative to include information of more countries that are, for which we currently have no information.
Okay. Thank you. Well, along the same lines, in fact, I have a comment, half question from Patricia, because indeed she's thinking of the fact that it would be very interesting to put, let's say, on the same scale, the national and the Italian national assessments with the international assessments. And therefore, she was asking, well, how much, well, the doability, let's say, is it possible to do it? And if so, what are the constraints, the difficulties to do so, and what would it take?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of work that has been doing, countries have been doing on that. There's a project that is called the Rosetta Stone, referring to this, the original Rosetta Stone, to put everything on the same scale, everything on the same language. Technically speaking, it shouldn't be that difficult if, for example, in the national assessments, we include a set of linking items from the international assessments, then we could technically create a scale that is comparable. It's the very same thing that you do with the trends of the different cycles. It's not the same exam, it's not the same test that PISA is applying every 3 years, but it has linking items that are linked to one year to the previous, so you can compare. Yeah, you have to have these anchor items and probably anchor persons to link those things. So this is possible, and this would be probably the best solution. However, the question remains of what we are measuring, because the frameworks, to what extent the frameworks of all the regional, international, and national assessments are comparable, that would be another question that we would need to discuss. From what I know that they are doing for the SDGs that are related to literacy and maths, they are trying something that is, because, well, the important thing to say now is that in most cases, in the great majority of cases, we don't have this anchoring. So we cannot compute it. In some cases we do, some countries do have them, and they have done it. They have produced scales that are comparable, but in most cases this is not possible. So what they have done, what they have tried is something that they call, if I remember well, policy alignment, which is a more qualitative alignment of the frameworks. And then with that, even though it's not exactly the same question, if they are measuring the same context, they are trying different methods to do it. It has many empirical limitations, but again, I go to the same point. I think we have to work with what we have, and we have practical limitations for things. We cannot apply the same test in all countries around the world. This is a fact. Ideally, we would do a census, no? But well, we cannot do that. It's not a practical solution. So what we have, with what we have, this is what we could do, and this is what some countries are already doing, and I think that at the very least is promising.
Thanks. Well, I have a follow-up question, which basically explores the situation in Italy in this case. I mean, INVALSI is making a huge effort about linking data, meaning INVALSI data, you can, the statistical service of INVALSI is able to link data by individual students, so that you can, if student, let's say, does an international assessment or does a national assessment, you will be able to have basically the results of the student in both assessments linked. But link in the sense that you have the same student, that you know that the same student has done both exams, and you're able to, the statistical service of INVALSI can actually give you both data sets. Now, would this be, in a sense, good enough, or do you still need to link directly the tests in order to have something that, well, in a sense, puts everything on the same scale?
I think, I mean, technically, with one would suffice. And as you say, I know INVALSI has been doing this kind of thing, but I think that the main question is really, it has to do with what we are measuring. Because even if we, I mean, some people have put in the same scale, for example, PISA and teams. And Russia has a very recent data set where they have the same students doing teams and peers, and then they put them in the same scale. The question is rather, what are we measuring, and what is this for? I think if we do an exercise similar to the one that we did here, like you have a third framework, and then you are matching different frameworks into the third one. I think that could be an approach that could be followed, and with the limitations that I mean, you have to be open. If you go to the reports that we produce, for example, you will see that we have a graph in which we say, okay, we had that many categories and subcategories from which we found indicators to measure 85%, something like that. But we have still this 15% that we just don't have anything to measure them. So we have to leave them out. And it is I think it is possible, but it's also very important that we use the information with carefully, because of course these items, these subcategories that we didn't measure, they are already forgotten. Nobody's talking about them, and nobody will talk about them, but they were probably important. No? So I think we have to be careful to do the things carefully in detail, in the most accurate possible way. But I think it is possible, and this is how I would do it.
Perfect. Thanks. Do we have any additional? Well, our time is up, but given that our second speaker, as mentioned before, is not going to be available, we could have some more minutes in case there is additional questions from the audience. Let's maybe we can give it a moment to allow shy people to give additional question if the case. And well, one question maybe I ask in between concerning this topic of sustainable education, sustainable development education. How explicit did you find it to be? I mean, is in your review of curricula of multiple countries, because an issue, of course, for example, if I think of Italy, global citizenship is becoming again an interculturalism and global citizenship are becoming again an issue of relevant importance. But I admit I've been away from Italy now for some years, but I don't see in the headlines, let's say, a direct reference to sustainable development education. How often did you find this topic to be present in the curricula of different countries?
I think it is very present in the, for example, in this study with 78 countries, analyzing the curricula of 78 countries, the findings indicate that it is covered in all countries, and it also, you know, when you talk about education for sustainability, most people think, and this is what I see most in, not in like in the media, people think about environmental education, like ecology, taking care of yeah, like global warming and so on and so forth. When you analyze the curriculum, you realize that when people talk in, well, when teachers, when schools talk about education for sustainability, they also mean other things like social sustainability or economic sustainability, and those are, I think that those are important. But I think what could be needed is a broader understanding, a better understanding of the broader society. What does it mean? Because it has to do with topics like social justice. Social justice is a topic that is very often, in most cases, treated within education for sustainability, economic sustainability, financial literacy, these kind of things, because, well, that can take us to a completely different topic. But if we think about the capitalist system, we know that it's not possible, just in practical terms, that this model is not sustainable. You know, for this model to be sustainable, we should have a perpetual growing, which we want to be able to have. So these kind of things that are all interconnected are in the curriculums, but I don't see them that much in the general discourse. But I think this is something that we could, as educationalists, as educational researchers, do in our communication with non-academic audiences, to expand the definition, to have a broader definition of what does education for sustainability really means, and what are all the factors that are involved in it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andres. Well, I didn't see additional questions, therefore I guess that we can close the session here. I would like really to thank you for, I mean, your interesting perspective, which broadens, in a sense, the scope of what we're often looking at, which is research referred to the schools, and has allowed us to go into a more international dimension. And well, I look forward to seeing you hopefully in Rome in November, and I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. It was a pleasure to be here.